We have our last installment with Mr. Nathan Rinne, our friend Nathan Rinne from Concordia St. Paul, talking about this whole notion of Afropessimism. I know you guys might get sick of me talking about race and racial reconciliation, all that sort of thing, but I don't care. It's an important topic, especially an important topic for the church, so we're going to keep going with it. Also, in layman's terms, it's making a little break from social media, but we'll get to all that. This is Matthew Garnett. Welcome to In Layman's Terms.
Once you liberate words from things, then you find their meaning, their bedrock meaning in what it is not. And I would argue, we have argued, that the word human has not been interrogated in this way. And that its bedrock opposite is the slave, that the slave, the past at least 1,300 years, is quintessentially black.
So, like I said, we've got Nathan Rinne on again this week talking about Wilderson and Afropessimism and critical theory and all this sort of thing we've been talking about for nigh on 2 years now. But before we get to all that, let me remind all of you to go to laymanstermsradio.org and donate to our Men of Steel project, where we are hoping to establish a truck driving school for former inmates. Several of you have given to this already. We're about a third of the way there. We just had a donation come in the other day, along with all the others. That puts us about a third of the way there. Again, we're not raising $30,000 for a well in Kenya this time, although we got that done. At least we're a part of it. The feat is not that high this time. We've got to get only to about $1,800, and then we've got another donor coming in to match that, to hire a professional, because we all know I need professional help around here, especially for a project like this. It's a great idea, I think. I've been told it's a great idea. I think it would be a great idea if it worked out. But you got to have the money, and you've got to have an expert that can come alongside of you to help you raise the money in a way that isn't inefficient or a waste of everybody's time, and that sort of thing. So that's what we're shooting for there. Please go to laymanstermsradio.org, donate to that project so we can hire our expert to get a business plan, a business model, and everything else going for us, and that'll be great. We're looking forward to making that happen. Okay, so we're talking about critical theory and that sort of thing, and the reason it's interesting, over the past really 2 years now, since I've really taken a deep dive at the behest of my friend Steve Kozar on postmodernism, and this is something I was educated in at Claremont. It's something I knew about. He knew that I knew about it, and he thought it'd be a good thing to explore. I started exploring it, and as it turns out, this is really a major issue in our political climate today. You've heard people, this is becoming mainstream, this whole notion of critical theory, this whole notion of postmodernism. This is coming into the public eye. Well, and this is what happens when you teach college-age kids something. They take that something, and then they go out into the public square and they try to do something with it. And that's what's happened. People think, oh, these college kids, they'll, we're not worried about their radicalism. They'll get out of school and so on and so forth. Well, I think there's some truth to that, honestly. I think some of these kids will get out of school and they'll see that those radical ideas simply just don't work, and some of them are, in mainstream politics, mainstream media, etc., and they're going to find that at the end of the day, it's just not going to work. But in the meantime, it's very, very annoying. That's what I think. I don't have the doomsday theory that everybody has about, postmodernism being this thing that's going to completely overturn the republic. It could, if we let it go to certain points, but really, there's never been, with a country as large as ours and as diverse as ours is, it's not going to be, if there's going to be a change of power, or if the country's going to go in a completely different direction than it's gone in the past 200 years, it's not going to be peaceful. Now, why am I talking so much politics here? Well, these kind of politics are going to affect the church, to be sure, and that's what Nathan and I really home in on and focus in on. And really, the reason we picked this Wilderson interview, and I'm going to go back, I'm going to back up several minutes into this interview that you heard last week, and then catch the end of Nathan and I's interview going forward. So that's really what we're going to do here. And the reason we want to do it is because we want the church to understand that this is what you're faced with. And so when you kind of are seeing these sorts of things go on, here's the kind of individual that is at the rock bottom of all this. All right, this guy isn't hiding the ball. He's giving you the story straight. He's telling you what the objectives are, what they're hoping to accomplish, and these sorts of things. And at one point, he even talks about the end of the world. We used to talk in these terms. When we talked about the end of the world, what we were talking about was the end of Western civilization. That was a failed idea, that it produced such inequity and disparity and outcomes in the way we treated each other that it just couldn't possibly be Christian. And Nathan and I challenged that this week. We say no, that in fact is not the way we want to go. And so at any rate, that's really why we're trying to do some of these things around here, is because this is really becoming in the news. If you listen to the news at all, you even heard it on the presidential debate stage. You heard President Trump and former Vice President Biden bring up the topic of critical race theory. So it's a big issue. It's difficult to understand what the objectives are, what's trying to be done here. It's confusing to a lot of people, and unless you understand what kind of game's being played here, then you're not going to be able to combat it. And that's really the whole point of bringing it up and talking about it so much. So all that prolegomena to say, our last installment with Nathan Rinne is this week. Go to laymanstermsradio.org and donate to the Men of Steel Project. Also, if you like the podcast and you want to promote it, go for it. I'm done promoting the podcast on Facebook and Twitter. I am trying to remove myself from those areas. I think that they are, by and large, counterproductive. There can be some good aspects to them. There's good ways to disseminate information. But I think that the era of those platforms largely being helpful is over. That's just my opinion. I'm going to take a break from them, at least, if not a permanent break from those platforms. I see no need to be on them. I used to get on there and debate and hackle and and people just aren't interested in that anymore. They're more interested in other things. They've got their own agendas to forward and that sort of stuff. And I just don't have time for that. I don't have the time. I don't have the energy. I don't have the emotional capacity to do that anymore. So I let that go a long time ago. And I just kind of promote the podcast on there. And really, I get just as many of y'all subscribing to the podcast, listening to it, etc., by advertising on Facebook and Twitter and whatnot, as I do just doing the podcast and not wasting my time on there. So if you want to promote it on Facebook or Twitter, go for it, or any other social media platform. That's up to you. Share it with your friends, but really, we're not going to be responding to messages coming through there. If you want to get us a message, obviously go to laymanstermsradio.com, go to the contacts. You can contact us there, and we can respond to you. But we're not doing we are freeing ourselves from those two social media platforms. So just wanted everybody to know that. Anyway, done with all that. Let's get on to the last installment with our interview with Nathan Rinne. Here we go.
Afropessimism, we have described it to you, describes the totality of every black person's life. I mean, there are black billionaires, and there are black starving people. There are black trans people, and there are black hetero people. But I would say that all those differences are important and inessential. What I'm suggesting is that the three elements of social death are the truth of black existence, not the totality. Just as I would say that in psychoanalytic feminism, a properly Oedipalized girl/woman is the truth of Oedipal triangulation. not the totality of how a girl, child, or a woman lives their lives. And just like I would say that exploitation is the truth of capitalist domination, but definitely not the totality of how someone lives their lives under capitalist domination. So the truth, so what do I mean by truth? What I mean by truth is if you were to undo this one little widget, would the world come apart? And so the desire, the theoretical desire for that project is very different from the theoretical desire of projects of hybridity. Even projects of hybridity that don't announce themselves as being so are really fundamentally asking themselves a question: how do I, as a non-conforming visual person or a non-conforming sexualized person, live in this society? That's not a question you can ask through Afropessimism. The only question you can ask through Afropessimism is, what is at the core that holds it together, that if you undid it, you'd have the end of the world? Very different desires motivating a different strain of questions.
Okay, so there you go. So what is the end of the world, right? that's how that's the term he used. Very, very interesting phraseology there. But he is asking a completely different question. What thread do we need to pull on? So in other words, he talks about how, okay, you've got females, you've got feminism, and what's their end goal? Is it to live in the world as it is? You've got the sexual revolution, transgenderism. He cites specifically what are they trying to just live in the world? And what he's saying is that what Afropessimism claims is that we're not trying to live in the world. We're trying to end it. That's the thing he's after. And you're going to hear him go on here, I think, and talk about how if we start pulling on the thread of his claim that fundamentally blackness is defined against humanness, again, we've got these binary opposites. We start pulling on that thread, that's what's going to end the world, and that's what we're shooting for. Are you? That's what again made me almost drive off the road. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, at least he's being honest. He is shooting for a complete societal change. When he talks about the end of the world, that's I think that's that phraseology is really, he's saying that his claim here with Afropessimism is, it's not the sexual revolution, it's not the feminist movement, but it in fact is the blackness, the Afropessimism, that's going to be the thread that if we start pulling on that, that's what's going to really redefine everything and bring about whatever it is he's hoping to bring about, which again in Marxist theory is the utopia.
Okay, well, man, and you might be right on that too, because one of the interesting things about this interview as we continue, and I don't know if we'll get a chance to hear it or not, but she talks to him about like hope, and I think he says something like, "Well, if I gave the impression of hope, I really wish I wouldn't have done that." and he talks about like why he says that. He says because he's not religious. So he does see religion. He does see God as, I guess, Marx said the opiate of the people, and this whole idea, this false consciousness, right, that people embrace as their hope, but in reality, it's not really a true hope, right? So I think that's kind of, that was an interesting answer when she asked him if it kind of had some hope, and he's like, well, I didn't really want to give any hope. I don't want to give any hope, and because I'm not religious. So I was like, wow, where's what exactly does he mean by that? But I think that what you just said kind of maybe gives us a clue as to where his hope really lies, and his hope really lies in revolution. And I guess I don't know, Matthew. I don't know if he is saying that he wants violent revolution. He might very well be saying that. It's hard to listen to a guy like this who, again, very polite, very civil, very seemingly aware, socially, very sensitive guy. You know, you listen to him. To think about people as being, you know, violent revolutionaries and stuff is a difficult thing. But I guess we know what happened in the 20th century, right? We know the kinds of, I guess, good people, you know, the people we would have thought were our good neighbors. We know what can happen when these ideologies start to take over and start to become their religion, and the utopian fever dreams begin. And I mean, again, I think I brought this up in our last conversation, but I was struck by the fact that, you know, in one of the most momentous centuries of world history, the 16th century, with the Reformation and all the things that happened there with Luther, bringing the scriptures to the fore. But that was a time, like right around Luther's time was a time when everybody was discussing what is a just society, what does it mean to have a flourishing society, a good society, a righteous society. And there were all these books about utopia and how possible it was to have a better world. And I think people back then were a little bit, you know, they were more realistic. They weren't talking about revolutions so much, not everybody at least. But then, of course, we do have the stuff that happened in Münster and the Peasants' War in 1525. So, and yeah, so we know that revolutions have been something that have happened throughout human history too. Mm-hmm. So it's not like, you know, to talk about Marxism, it's not like it's something totally unique in that it deals with revolution, because revolutions have always happened, but it certainly does provide this intellectual superstructure to overthrow creation, to overthrow hierarchy, to overthrow authority, and kind of to justify it, to rationalize it, and it is like, it's like another religion. It's just not the mob being, you know, having their emotions ginned up about all the grievances, maybe some good grievances. I mean, some things that really, you know, they're right to be upset about, but to overthrow people violently, not a good thing. I mean, this is where, you know, Christians, I mean, this is the difficult thing, right? The kingdom of God does not come by arms and force, but it comes by the yeast working slowly through the dough, and by the birds building nests in the trees, and it comes through humble and simple means, and Christians can't get caught up in this stuff.
Right. Well, so a couple things. Three things I think of in response to your very well formed comments there. One, this is a really good example of cultural Marxism on display, because you notice Wilderson's comments throughout, where he talks about the class thing, the whole notion of Marx and the class struggle. That's not the key. That can add to it. And again, he's saying here with feminism, the sexual revolution, yeah, those things could add to the revolution, but really, what's going to be the foundation? What's going, again, his words, what's going to destroy the world? Well, when we take Afropessimism and flip it on its head, that's going to be the key. Now, these other, again, he'll go on to say, if I recall correctly, we might hear a little bit of it, that the intersectionality thing, that's great, it's fine, all adds to it, but really what's at the core of it is the blackness. And he might be right about that. Now, you talk about violent revolution, you know, the thing of it is that if you are oppressed by an evil, oppressive regime, as you know, as in Wilderson's worldview is going on here, which is Western culture, Western political. If you're oppressed by that, then, you know, if it takes violence to overthrow it, then that's what it takes, because that's just That's what we've got to do. That's where, again, your cultural Marxists are probably going to disagree with your traditional Marxists. So you got a few things here. Okay, so you've got your traditional Marxists, which Marx really believed that the working class, that eventually that would just, that the Marxist revolution, as it were, would just come about, naturally. That would be the natural. Marx theorized that the natural outcome of Western capitalism, particularly under Western liberal, and I say liberal in the traditional sense, liberal democracy, the natural outcome of that would be what Marx predicted, which would be, communist, Marxist communism. Then you've got Marxist-Leninists. So the best way I can describe a Marxist-Leninist is, what's his face? I can't remember who said this, but never let a good crisis go to waste. That's Marxist-Leninism. So in other words, hey, like right now in this election, if you were a Marxist and you wanted to see a revolution occur, this would be a great time to do it. So you elect a figurehead to the presidency who is backed up by somebody who believes in the cause. You do things like stack the courts so your policies can't be overturned. You essentially create a one-party system, and then you just do your thing. You execute your agenda. That's Marxist-Leninism. That's taking advantage of an opportunity. That's what Lenin did, essentially. Is he saw the weakness in the czarist structure of Russia, and he's an opportunist, in other words, right? So that's another way to do it. Because if you think about it, was the revolution in Russia violent? It was, but not on a massive scale. Most of it was a revolution of opportunity. So I think if you're going to see something like that happen here in the United States, that's kind of how it'll happen. It'll be violent to some degrees, but for the most part, it'll be an opportunist type of thing. Then you've got the people on the probably disagreeing with Marx and Lenin, saying if we've got to take up arms and do this thing, we can do it. Now, I don't think that's where Wilderson is. I think he's more of a Marxist-Leninist. He sees an opportunity. Yes, will there be violence? Of course, we'll deal with the violence as it comes, but we've got to take advantage of this opportunity. And again, that's all founded on the opportunity is with the race piece. That's where the real opportunity is. To bring about, quote, the end of the world, which he means what he means by that. So now let's get back to being Christians. A couple of reasons I'm a Christian is I know I can't save myself. I've tried that. It doesn't work. I need a savior. So, so again, that's one of the big things I disagree, with Jordan Peterson and the whole self-help, the whole, that kind of thing. There's value in that in some ways, but at the end of the day, who's saving you? You're saving yourself, right? That's one problem I have. The other reason I'm a Christian, this is maybe my pragmatism is showing a little bit too much here, but the other reason I'm a Christian is because men can't save themselves. Same reason I personally can't save myself. We can't save ourselves. We just have to hold on until God is going to bring about the utopia, not us. And the more we try to bring about the utopia, the more disaster, chaos, murder, and just complete disaster we bring on ourselves. And we've seen some pretty good examples of that when people have tried to bring about the utopia throughout human history. Mao, the usual suspects: Mao, Lenin, Stalin, Pol Pot, and so it goes. When we see men try to do that, it's just death and disaster and chaos and just terrifying horror. Yeah. And so that's why the reason I'm a conservative is because I'm just like, let's set up a system where we can just hang on until Jesus comes back. That's all I'm looking for. I'm not looking for you to create a utopia. I'm not looking for you to make my life better. All I'm looking to do is, can we just hang on until Christ comes back? That's all I'm looking for when it comes to political philosophy. That's why, again, my cousin and I, we've actually started a new podcast, but he's a one party, you know, socialist, basically. Thinks that if the United States more reflect, maybe I told you about this, if we more reflected, the type of government that China has, we would be a better country.
You're doing a podcast with him?
Yeah, yeah.
Really?
I'll send you. Yeah, I'll send you the link. It's called the Matt and Jeff Show. It's actually just a YouTube channel right now, but I'll send you the links to it.
It's kind of like Hannity and Combs for a new age.
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Well, Matt, let me just say something too. I appreciate
Sure.
your filling me in on a lot of this stuff because when you asked me to talk about this after I sent the show to you, I'm just like, oh, good Lord, I shouldn't be talking about this stuff. But
no,
really,
it's not. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation though, and I appreciate you bringing some of your insight and your knowledge to all of these issues. Now, the whole thing about Marxism too. I mean, I do feel like it's really important to emphasize just like kind of the appeal, the appeal that it really does have to so many people, because there is this sense in all of us, I think, where we want to see harmony. We want to see people who treat each other well, who give one another their due, people who like live by the golden rule and like do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I mean, in a capitalist system, you can see how, things sometimes go kind of awry. And with the competition that drives people, maybe sometimes people who are owners of businesses, they don't feel like they can really treat their workers as well as they should,
Sure.
And that's the thing that really kind of I struggle with, because I know that people in general, we just kind of do long for, I think there's an echo of Eden in all of us.
Sure.
And and the
Absolutely.
scriptures even talk about eternity in our hearts.
Yep.
And we look at the way the early church did treat each other, where people were kind of willingly just giving a lot of their possessions. And we know that the church emphasized taking care of the poor. And so this is I think this is a real struggle here for us as American Christians to kind of wrestle with all of this stuff and to point out that at least Marx, when he was talking about the rich and the poor, I mean, it's not like the Bible doesn't ever talk in those categories either. I mean, it does kind of divide people up into, let's just say it, the haves and the have-nots. And I think it really does. Now, I think oftentimes the poor in Scripture, when it talks about the poor, kind of the physically poor and the spiritually poor kind of get merged together.
Sure.
Like in Matthew, he does talk about the poor in spirit. And in Luke, it talks about, on the Sermon on the Plain, he talks about the poor. And so, I mean, it is difficult. But ideally, who would be most prepared for the gospel? I mean, it would be probably people who are at the end of their ropes, right? I mean, everybody kind of is prepared for the gospel at the point of death, and I shouldn't say everybody is, but death is kind of that universal leveler where we kind of will maybe have that opportunity to come to grips with the fact that we're dying because of our sin. And we need a savior, because death was not in the cards from the beginning, and death is not as natural, as normal as death is now. That wasn't part of it. And so, I mean, you've got that, but then you've also got what did Luther call it? He called it the Vale of Tears, which maybe wasn't the best. I mean, I think he's kind of borrowing secular language there when he said that. And so, I think that as Christians, I think that it's very easy for me to see how people can be so tempted to Marxism or just like socialism. I just want to be a Christian socialist. And I'm thinking to myself, well, don't even do that. Be a Christian Democrat or something. Don't call yourself a Christian socialist, because socialism so easily seems to merge right into it goes right back into the Marxism. And the Marxism is so tempting because of the things that it emphasizes that A, are kind of in the Bible, and B, are things that we as Christians probably have fallen down on in a lot of ways. But at the same time, I'm not going to go all Tim Keller either. Tim Keller kind of seems to make these, like the sexual issues and the justice issues with the poverty issues. He's like saying like, well, they're kind of, they're both areas where Christians have failed. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. But on the other hand, it's like, with the sexual issues, you kind of got a lot of binary yes or no stuff going on there. Whereas with the poverty issues and greed, this becomes more difficult. It becomes more difficult to think like what is, let's just say it, what's equitable, what's fair, what's just. I mean, so anyway, I wanted to say all that. And can I ask you another question? But you can ignore the question if you want and finish things off. I know we're getting near the end. My question is, when Wilderson talks about pulling that thread and how that thread will be Afropessimism, we're dealing with the world from the Afro-pessimist view. That's going to be the key. How do you think he thinks that's going to be the key? Do you have any idea? I was just curious.
Well, I think we're looking at it right now where that narrative can be so easily spun into, hey, this country, from soup to nuts. That's really where I agree. If I were to become a Marxist-Leninist, I would be 100% on board with Wilderson on this. I'd be right down. Oh yeah, 100%. Because that's how you can attack Western civilization, particularly America. Look, you guys, 1619 Project says it all. This country was not founded in 1776. It was founded in 1619 on the backs of slaves. And ever since then, black bodies have been used to perpetuate this culture and societies. And so that's at the foundation of everything that is wrong here. So I think he's right about that. I don't think it's misogyny or sexual preference discrimination, whatever. Those are all stuff that can, like he says, can kind of add to stuff. But at the end of the day, the foundational claim we can make is that the United States is founded on the backs of black people. We can make that claim, and it is a compelling claim, very compelling claim.
Well, it's also one that you can argue against quite a bit too. I mean, it's not
you
like
can. You can't argue. You can't argue against it. However, I would say that against any other claim of grievance, even class. I mean, the poorest among us in this country are the richest in the world. So it's really hard to make a class claim here. That's one of the mistakes I think the Frankfurt School and Marcuse and those guys made was that they still wanted to do the class thing. And that's where they started to explore the cultural Marxist piece. That's really where they brought in cultural Marxism, which was a brilliant move, because we're not talking about class, because it's really difficult to talk about class in the United States. You can to some extent, and some Marxists in the United States try to do it and still try to talk about how, hey, poor people in Appalachia are just as bad off as poor people in inner city Chicago, blah, 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 blah. But it's still really difficult to make the class claim in the United States, just because there's so much prosperity here. The claim you've really got to make is one of race, and that's where I think Wilderson is spot on. If you're going to do this thing, it's got to be based on race. That's the move. That's the move, and I think it works. I think it works 100%. I mean, what are people rioting about right now? They're not rioting about transgender rights. They're not rioting about feminism. They're rioting about race. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess I'd kind of come back and say, like, look, I mean, if I had to choose between like who I thought had the better ideas, and let's kind of eliminate the idea that we're trying to overthrow everything. Let's just talk about observing it.
Let me just come back with one thing here. Again, that's why, as a Christian, why I'm conservative, because I'm like, all this stuff about bringing about the utopia, I don't believe. Just hang on till Christ comes back. That's all I'm trying to do. But anyway, yeah. So again, if I were to come out of that mode into the, hey, we men need to bring about the utopia on Earth, I would be on 100% on board with Wilderson, 100%. So without God and without the promise of Christ's return, that's exactly where I'd go.
All right. Well, that's really interesting. That's really interesting to hear you say. I mean, I tend to think that the category of class is a little bit, and I agree. I think, yes, we do have like the wealthiest poor in the world. But on the other hand, I mean, there is, and then maybe that kind of gives fuel to some of the capitalists who do what they do, right? Because they're like, hey, we've got the wealthiest poor in the world. I can do what I want. And so I just kind of tend to think that there's that temptation amongst those who get that kind of financial power and economic prowess and business prowess to just kind of roll over everybody. You know, it's like, I don't care what color you are. It's like, I'm just trying to, you know, maximize the output of this business for our stockholders, and you know, and we're going to benefit from it. So I don't think that nowadays, at least, you know, we've talked about this in the past. Systemic racism certainly has been a part. I've argued, you know, it's been a part of this the history of our country. But we've talked about like, well, what are the laws today? What are the laws today? Right. But I just don't get the sense that people generally are, you know, discriminating by race as much as people think they are. Right? I heard Rolf Nader talk about like, well, there's discriminatory injustice and indiscriminatory injustice. And I think it's probably more indiscriminatory. The injustice that often happens, I'm talking about people who just like don't have any consideration for their workers and things like that. So.
Yeah, well, yeah. So again, and the thing of it is, what we've observed in history is, so you take a godless, atheist, capitalist pig who's just going to roll over everybody he can to make as much money as he possibly can. All right, so you've got that guy. Then you've got somebody who wants to do what Wilderson's talking about, quote, in the world. I'll take the capitalist pig.
Yeah.
Okay? Because even the capitalist pig, you know, it's very difficult for him to become a complete totalitarian.
True.
You know, for as much as I am frustrated and annoyed by the censorship of Twitter and Facebook, and I can avoid them if I want to. And in a lot of ways I do. I'm not very active on Twitter and Facebook anymore. I used to be very, very active. Anymore, it's just an advertising platform for me. You know, I can avoid them if I want to. They don't have that much control over my life. If I choose to not allow them to have control over my life, just, you know, because at the end of the day, if the New York Post can't get a story put on Facebook, you know what? Fox News can put it out there. Somebody else can put it out there. You know, it becomes a bigger story when they try to be totalitarian. I mean, the thing of it is, that whole New York Post deal is such. I mean, that's the word of the day. Why? Because Dorsey and Twitter decided to censor it.
Yeah, I know.
Had they just let it go out as normal, it probably wouldn't be as big a deal. But now it's this, you know. So anyway, the point being is I can avoid a disgusting capitalist pig if I need to. But a totalitarian top-down government, I can't avoid that. Can't avoid that.
Very true.
And that's
and you'll learn, and then you have to learn to live by lies. We'll go to Roger.
Yeah, 100%. Hey, do you have time for me to play this one more segment and discuss? Are you out of time?
No, that's fine. You're just probably going to have to cut some of our other material, but go ahead.
Well, I'll run this as many episodes as I need to. This has been great. Okay. Let me just run one more segment, and then we'll be done.
Well, we won't settle whether pulling the thread of gender or race are. We won't settle all the big questions. But let me ask you another one, which has to do with. I'm tempted, but I'm not going to. It has to do with the book itself. So the conversation we've had has been at a high theory level, and that's not how the book reads. And as as I finished the book and as I looked at the schedule of events that you were arranging so that we could do the podcast or I could fit in with, I concluded that what you are, in a sense, right now is a translator. And you are translating this high level of theory to a very general audience. The kind of groups that you were meeting with at libraries, et cetera, were not the kind of conversation that we're having right now. And I'm wondering whether you buy that. Are you a translator? Is that what you're trying to do? And what has been the reaction when you are at the Philadelphia Free Public Library and when you meet with all of the audiences that you are at all of the places I was going to say that you're visiting, but you're virtually visiting?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that's an apt description. It sounds better than what I used to say, used car salesman. So, yes. I have a desire in my own life, which is to publish more books on that are stories. I mean, I didn't choose Afropessimism, and if I wasn't black and there wasn't anti-black racism and it wasn't in South Africa and it wasn't caught in all these places, I would probably be doing a degree in oceanography and writing poetry and short stories about nothing. I mean, I can't even think about it. So
I don't know,
so
Frank.
yes,
I think that if you're right, you that's not true. You would have been doing oceanography, but your poetry would have nevertheless been saturated with what you could not help but recognize walking through Minneapolis or Minnesota, where you were from in Minnesota, in the body that you inhabited. I think that's what you are arguing in the book.
Yeah, you're right. I'm being a bit facetious. And I guess what I was trying to say in a kind of humorous way is that the moment I sit down to go back to that kid in his 20s and later in his 30s, early 30s, to just write fiction, someone calls me to do something else.
Right.
I'm very happy with this book, though. I'm very happy, and I'm happy because it ended up with Liverite Norton and Bob Weil, who runs the entire imprint of Liverite, has worked with some really high-flying literary prose stylists, as well as some of the most major black political thinkers of the past 20 years, from Robin Kelly to Henry Louis Gates to Appiah, and so I was really able to tell him what I wanted to do with this in terms of melding these two things together in a free-flowing way, and he was able to run with it. It also helped that the marketplace, I can't get out of capitalism, helped because I get, right before that, before I pitched this book, Maggie Nelson had written The Argonauts. And so people had been, when I say people, I mean editors and publishers had been kind of primed for this auto theory hybrid genre hybrid genre book. But I think you're right with that translation moniker, because what took me by surprise, and I think it took Jared Sexton by surprise, and David Marriott, and Sadia Hartman, was, we were students. I was an older 40-something student. Jared was in his 20s. He was in her 20s. And then you had Sadia Hartman and David Marriott, who were at UC Berkeley and UC Santa Cruz, respectively. And they were our professors. And I just thought we were making an intervention into and against the second gesture of feminism, psychoanalytic feminism and Marxist theory. The second part being prescription, what should be done. We're just making an intervention and then Michael Brown was killed, and it just kind of started being read. I don't think the mainstream media or mainstream academia really understands the degree to which these articles and missives, before they were books, were being read on Tumblr and social media by the Movement for Black Lives organizations all around the world, and by another strain of people called high school and college debaters. So it really, and then when we got the Black Lives Matter movement going, it was as though this push-pull that happens rarely, but when it does happen, it's really beautiful, between Black activism on the ground and Black political thinking, really just set up kind of synergy between us.
Okay, so that is amazing, right? So now he's using these. Okay, so Michael Brown was killed justifiably by a police officer. I mean, all available evidence shows that. He doesn't care. What he cares about is the narrative. What kind of narrative can we spin out of this? How can we meld? I mean, so this is MarxismLeninism par excellence. This is opportunism. We have an opportunity here to infuse our philosophy into these grievance movements, and that's precisely what's going on. Particularly because, again, it helps that the founders of Black Lives movements are avowed Marxists. That helps. So you see, and that's where he's saying, whereas he calls it psychoanalytic feminism. I'm not quite sure what he means by that, but he kind of dismisses the feminism and the sexual revolution. Yeah, useful, but where the real deal is in this in these situations where black men are killed, justifiably or unjustifiably, doesn't matter. What we need to do is spin the narrative where where Western civilization is completely defined by blackness, and therefore systemically, that's where the systemic racism comes in. That's where the implicit bias comes in, and therefore we can infuse our philosophy into these movements on the ground that are making the noise. And I think he's thinking we got a real shot here, and he might be right. Again, if things go the way I think they're going to go next week, they got a real shot. They got a real shot to make this happen. And so, it's pretty astonishing. Go ahead.
All right. So yeah, and I mean, there's that desire to remake the world and to the utopia. But again, I mean, I like what you said about why you're a Christian, Matt. Mm-hmm. This is a movement that ultimately the philosophy is driven. It's pretty godless. It really is. Yeah. And Hegel kind of believed in God, it seems. Marx didn't really seem to believe in God. This guy's a Marxist. He talks about how humanness requires blackness to exist. Well, okay. That woman in the podcast, she did push back a little bit. She's like, well, how was human defined before all of this stuff? And I think biblical literature might have something to say about this. Like, well, she's right. It does. Because the word human is pretty recent. It's like, I don't know how many hundreds of years old it is. But before that, we talked about man. And if you look at what man means, there is this element that man is created. And so Adam, right? The thing is like his world is without the creator, and his world, and since he lives in a Western society and in America, which is a very, 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 very imperfect nation. But it does have a lot of Christians. It has been influenced by Christianity. I would say Christianity has been a leavening influence against the worst things in America. But because he's there, it's like he's not only at war with the Creator, but he's at war with Christ, and he's going to overturn everything. And I wonder if you're right about all this stuff. The last 20 minutes of our conversation here have been pretty illuminating, I think. Guess we just really need to be praying for our country, and
Sure.
and I know who I'll be voting for.
Well, yeah,
But,
yeah. Well, and again, that is, and again, the both of us, I think, are in the same place. That's premised on no human philosophy is going to bring about this utopia. I mean, historically, you can evidence. It's not like we're just completely basing this on scripture, although it is found in the scripture. But if you look at history, anybody that's tried to do this, it's been awful, terrible, and resulted in all kinds of violence and horror. And so again, I'm convinced by history and Holy Scripture that all we need, I want a system that just hangs on. Hey, does that mean we don't tweak stuff here and there, or try to make stuff more just? Can we? Does that mean maybe we should do universal health care? Maybe that'll be a more just society. Okay, we can have that debate. I'm cool with that. Do we need to reform police practices? Well, we can have that discussion. Okay, can we tweak stuff here and there? I'm cool with that. But that is not at all what Wilderson is talking about here. He is not talking about tweaking anything.
right.
He's talking.
I was just saying, he goes on to talk about too just the amount of influence that he's been able to have in Black Lives Matter, in spite of the fact that she says, well, Black Lives Matter is a hopeful organization, and he, and he's just kind of like, well, I'm not so hopeful about things, but I sure have been able to work with them a lot, and I've trained like hundreds of their people in the last several months.
Yeah, he does go. Yep, he does go on to say that. So. Again, just circling back to the original thrust I wanted to put on this is, those of you out there that are listening to this that are, playing around with the Ouija board of critical theory, this is what it's about, folks. It's godless, it's not Christian, and it never can be. You cannot baptize this philosophy.
I think you're right.
Yeah. According to somebody like Wilderson, you would be a joke to him. I think Bradley Mason would be an absolute joke, other than the fact of being a useful idiot. Hey, all right, well, you're advancing our causes among Christians, okay, fine, whatever. But at the end of the day, you better realize, what's going down here.
Even very smart, useful idiots are useful idiots.
Right. Well, and again, if you take away my faith in this, you take away, my Christian faith, and ask me to pick a system, I'm more bent toward the capitalist system, where at least I can get away from, the capitalist pig. But you're talking about totalitarianism here. So I just, where, but if I was in a situation where I thought, okay, yeah, we men have to bring about the utopia. Well, capitalism ain't going to do it. Western democracy is so far from perfect and so far from bringing about utopia for people. It's not even, you can't even discuss it. If you're looking at bringing about the utopia, then we're gonna have to keep messing around with this sort of thing. Anyway, what do you think, man? Got a good one in here? I think so.
Well, yeah, I think so too. Christian hope is the way to go. New heavens, new earth. Jesus Christ, way, truth, and the life. Take a look at him, man. It's like when you get into conversations like this, I sometimes feel so hopeless. But I just look at him, and I look at everything that he did, and the way he handled everything, and the way he dealt with every person in the world, and the way he cried out from the cross, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And I'm just like, man, that is my man. That is my man. So
100%.
Thank you, Matthew. Great conversation.
Yeah, well, and I would say, I think the message we definitely want to send here to folks is, part of the problem with our Western culture right now is that it's set up for men to govern themselves. And I am convinced, and I think the founding fathers believe this as well, that if you are godless, that it's impossible for you to govern yourself, because then you're just accountable to you. And men are not very good actors when the only person they're accountable to is themselves. So you need a higher authority. Yeah, you need a higher authority to which to be accountable. So if Western culture is going to work, you know, that again, there's my pragmatism coming out again. I know I have a tendency toward that, but you know, that's what I tell, you know, folks who, yeah, that, you know, that are, you know, my atheist friends who are like, yeah, I love Western capitalism and liberal democracy. And I'm like, well, if you want that to continue, atheism ain't the way to go with it. You know, that's why guys like Sam Harris and, you know, whoever else, the atheists, you know, who like Western ideals and enlightenment. I'm like, if you want that to continue, you know, atheism ain't the way to go. And telling people they should be atheists, that's not the move.